All right, and welcome back to a new episode of Real Talk. I am Ryan Matthews here with Jeffrey Klein, and we are going to talk about a could be touchy subject today.
Yeah.
And that's working with family in real estate. I have done it. You are currently in the process of doing it. And we do a lot of some of the pushback we sometimes get is people are like, hey, I have family, I know a realtor, I have my mom or my cousin or my aunt or whomever is a realtor. But we've run into some pitfalls through our own experience that are just something that we should talk about that is kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, there's 80,000 active realtors, maybe a little bit less now.
Yeah.
So I think years ago, the statistic was every person knows at least 4 realtors.
Yeah.
Right. And so that number's probably dwindled a little bit. But odds are you probably have a few that you know. One of them is a family member, one of them is a friend. If you're thinking about working with a family member, these are some of the things that you should know. Right?
Exactly.
These are some of the things that we've experienced or are experiencing in my case.
Exactly. Yes. And I mean, there were some pitfalls that I don't think I expected when working with family.
Yeah.
And one of the first ones that we kind of talked about, you must be intentional with the relationship.
Yes.
And I think that goes into you're so used to being family, and especially if it's your parents, they have a parental role.
Yeah.
And when you are now the professional, that roles are kind of reversed in a way. Are you finding that?
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. I think that the difference is like, I don't know, I guess it's more of a boundary thing. So we'll touch on that in a second.
Okay.
But as far as the roles being reversed, I mean, yeah, a little bit. I mean, my mom is probably like many where she watches a lot of Zillow and HGTV. And but I think that they trust my expertise and stuff. So I think that they're like, and they know I've been doing it for forever, right? And so I think that they know that. And so I think that in that regard, the roles are a little reversed because it's kind of me giving them advice and telling them what they should do and offering solutions and maybe having some difficult discussions. So.
Exactly. I think that's when it really hit me with my parents, there were some times when I was like, man, the frustrations come out. We've talked about this in the real estate transaction that people get frustrated, emotions run high, and especially if you're selling or buying a house, like if you're selling a house, there's memories that you're also leaving behind.
Yeah.
And then you have to pack up, and I mean, it could be a death or any situation is going to exacerbate it. And then buying the same way, finances are involved, and anytime money, it creates high stress. And there were times I think with my parents where I just had to say, hey, there are certain things that I'm recommending, and I understand you don't want to do it, but in order to sell the house for top dollar, which is what our goal was, we have to do these things.
Yeah.
And as uncomfortable as it's going to be, it's all for the greater good.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult to have those conversations too, right? Is like, there's some, my parents have lived in their house since 2001. It is very original.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's some things that they need to take care of or that we're recommending that they take care of.
Update.
And so, yeah. And I think it's a little bit, everyone thinks their house is perfect, right? I think that my house is fantastic.
Yeah.
I know that there's some stuff I got to fix if I ever decide to sell it.
Same, guilty.
Yeah. And so I think that like, it's different when you recognize those things, but then having somebody kind of point those things out is a little difficult to hear.
Yeah, so. It can feel a little invasive, even if it's from family.
Yeah.
And I think that's where with the parents, they're used to having a parental role, and that's where we as a professionals have to step into that professional role and essentially be that guiding figure that they're used to being, and they have to be on the receiving end.
Yeah.
And so I think that is one of the biggest things I found working with family that can be really tough.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Exactly. So. And secondly, we also have to have, you kind of touched on it, clear boundaries.
Clear boundaries.
Yes. Elaborate on that. Tell me what you mean. Yeah.
So my mom I'm firstborn, right? I'm the boy. Like, I got a younger sister. So, like, I'm not saying that I'm a favorite by any means, even though I probably am. I don't think anyone will watch this. We'll see. But anyway, and so, but what I am saying is that, like, there's definitely some emotions that come with that. And there's definitely my mom wanting to be a mom and kind of protect and kind of coddle. And, I think that my dad kind of, in a different capacity, firstborn son, like, there's a different role there too, right?
Yeah.
And we're not into the family dynamics so much, but so I think it's really interesting. And like, my dad is actually handling it very well, and he's been very much like, when we go to sit down and have conversations about what's happening with the house, he's been very much like, listen, like, he's not your son right now. He's your realtor. This is a business thing. And so my dad's been really fantastic at that.
That's
my
good.
mom's struggled with it a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting, like, in that regard, like, having those boundaries and just being like, hey, look, like, in this capacity right now, in this moment, I am not your son. I am your realtor. We are in, I don't want to say an employment agreement. We are in agreement of, like, doing business together.
Right.
We're in a business agreement.
I mean, it could be an employment agreement.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah, absolutely.
And so because of that, it's just interesting. It's just an interesting dynamic. And you have to have those boundaries where you have to say, look, I'm not, and like, I touched on earlier with maybe some maintenance stuff, is I'm not calling your house crap. I'm telling you that buyers will notice this, or buyers are going to ask for credit when it comes time to repairs. You need to be aware of that. And I know that you think it's not that big of a deal, but it is. Exactly. And so I think that having those boundaries of being like, look, it's not supposed to be offensive. It's just me telling you this. So
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where, when we went through I think the house that I sold for them, they bought in 97.
Okay.
And we sold it, I think, at the end of 2021. So they've been there 20 some years, and it was recently updated. Mm-hmm. How we got into it, it was a steal. That's for another time.
Yeah.
But it was all from the mid 90s. It was remodeled then. So everything was brass. All the wood was, they were oak cabinets, oak floors. And it took them about a year they did a lot. They spent a lot of money on it. Mm-hmm. They got the floors completely redone. They painted it. They were up in Washington and I was here. So it was a lot of remote conversations to talk about things. Mm-hmm. There were things where my mom, there were these blue blinds on my room as a kid.
Yeah.
And she was like, I love these blinds. We should get more. I was like, we should not get more blue blinds. It was not a good, it wasn't the look of 2021.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, that's fine. We may not agree, but I was like, we need to just take those down.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to have those conversations, but they were really good about, we took all the brass and I said, we just have to switch to at least something more contemporary. Mm-hmm. So they got all these stainless, I think it was like a brushed nickel is what they went all across. Mm-hmm. And we had this handyman who was great because we couldn't get the bathroom fixtures off. Mm-hmm. It was this whole built-in, big, kind of soaking tub.
Okay.
And they would have had to take all this old acrylic, which needed
to be,
I'm sure that anyway, they were going to redo the whole bathroom anyway.
Yeah.
But what this handyman was so smart, he gets the bright metal paint, spray paint, and he spray painted them.
There you go.
And I was like, cost him $10.
Yeah.
And it was great the way they had this handyman. We made a list together. They got it all knocked out, and it looked fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I went up there to Washington to sell it. And you did an open house on your parents' house. So I'll be curious to see what you think about this. Did you have some nostalgia? And is there sadness about it, selling it?
No, I think I've kind of told you this too. Is there's not a lot of sadness behind it. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah.
And I think the big part of it is that my parents are moving into my grandparents' house.
Right.
And there's a lot of positive memories from that.
Yeah.
And so I think that because they're moving into, and this is currently right out as we get closer to closing, I'm sure it'll feel different. But
yeah.
Currently, no. There's a lot of positive memories in both places, and so for me, it's not really if they were selling and moving to a new state or moving to a new build or a new city or whatever, that would probably feel a lot different.
Yeah.
And in this capacity, currently it doesn't. But I know that you've told me that you had quite a bit of nostalgia.
Yeah, it was wild. So doing the open house, people would ask about the house, and I would disclose that I was related to the sellers, and a lot of them were the neighbors that knew me from 14 years old.
Yeah.
And now I'm 37, 38 selling the house. So they knew that I grew up there and was related, but some people didn't know. And I was like, yeah, I'm the seller's son. And they're like, oh, which? I was like, yeah, that one was my room. I'm glad the walls can't talk. And it was really fun doing the open house to be able to sell it. Yeah, we had a great time and we had a good turnout. It was a beautiful home, and the neighborhood they sold in was highly coveted. Mm-hmm. But when we got to closing, I kind of closed out the house, and it was really sad to kind of close it up. We had left some poinsettias there. It was during the holidays. It closed early December. So, it was completely vacant. So I said, we have to get some poinsettias to make it look holiday-y. And I kind of was the last person there. And it really was. I was like, man, I have this like tinge of sadness. Like, this is the last time that we're going to be there. And we'd been there for so long.
Yeah.
And there really was. It was kind of some mixed feelings after. I was like, man, was this the right idea? I was like, that's what they wanted to do to downsize. But it was definitely hard to be the last one to close it out.
Yeah.
And then I've been back a couple of times. A bunch of my high school friends have now moved into that neighborhood.
Oh, man.
And so I get to go see it. And through friends, we'd actually known the buyer. Like through groups of friends, like I knew them. Or at least 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
So I didn't know him personally, but like I've still gone back to the neighborhood, so it's kind of cool to see the house every now and then. No, it's stayed pretty much the same.
At least from the outside, yeah.
From the outside, yeah. I think they were going to do some stuff to the inside, but I don't think that much, because what my parents did really brought it up.
Nice.
I mean, you could make some changes, but I don't think anyone's going to get rid of the oak cabinets, and the floors were nice, like totally redone. So I think painting and some personalization, but I think largely it's still the same.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Man,
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I get my memory every December of it closing, and it's always fun to think back on.
Yeah. That's crazy, dude. And that's a big change for you, because you don't even live in the state anymore. You know?
Yeah.
My parents, they're moving literally to the same neighborhood, dude. They're moving around the corner. It's like a 30-second drive, right? And so, it'll just be kind of interesting. Like, I will drive by their house. We go every Taco Tuesday, so I'll kind of drive by what is their current house on the way to their new house. So.
Yeah. And do you think it'll take a while to just be, I got to turn right instead of turn left?
I think so. Technically, I probably won't have to drive by. There's another turn that I can take. It's probably a little bit more direct to their house, but I think a couple times I'll probably drive by it and just see.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the exterior is going to change much either, so kind of probably similar. It's like they just painted it 2 years ago, so it doesn't need paint. It's pretty nice.
It'll largely stay the same.
Yeah. So I don't think I'll notice the changes. So it'll be kind of interesting.
Yeah. It'll be fun to. We'll have to revisit it later. And see what you think.
Yeah.
Now, as far as like your level of professionality, what have you found working with family versus? I mean, obviously, we're always professional.
Yeah.
With any clients we have. Have you found that it requires a different level of professionality when we're working with them?
I haven't. The only thing I will say is, so we recently discussed pricing.
Okay.
And I've been trying to get. It's just been. I guess you know what? I take that back. I have been trying to do things a little bit differently with them. I used to not necessarily walk through listing agreements. I'd walk through some of the stuff and then just kind of flip signing here.
Yeah.
Right. And this time I actually walked them through it really well. And my dad's like, can't we just DocuSign this? I'm like, yes, you could, but I'm trying to get better at my crap. And also, I want you to know like what you're signing. You're my parents. Like, you should definitely understand this. And so
100%.
That was a little bit different for me. So I did that. And then during a price reduction, usually I'll pull up some comps or whatever and send them their way and say, hey, we need to talk about pricing. In this scenario, I went over to their place actually just this Monday.
Okay.
And we talked about stuff. And I pulled up the Cromford Market Index. I pulled up the comps in the neighborhood. I called the agent that had a similar house in the neighborhood and said, hey, what happened? You guys are temporarily off market. What happened? You guys were under contract at one point. Like, just give me the down low. What happened to this house, right? Yeah. And so when I went to their house, I was armed with more data than I usually have. Usually it's like, hey, these are the comps. This is what I think you drop to, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Series of text messages and phone calls.
Right.
But this time I was like, no, I want to sit down with you guys and really walk you through the data. And part of that, I think, it is working with family. I don't want them to feel like it's a personal thing.
Right.
And I want them to see like my data and the numbers coming from somewhere. Like, the conversation is not just me. It's not an opinion. It is, these are the facts.
Right.
And so I think in that regard, that's a little bit different too.
Yeah. And I think I found the exact same thing. It was really interesting where we still bring that high level anyway, but I think there was some of that as well, where I got some feedback from my dad, which was interesting. There were certain things that I would say where it would almost be like glossing over in a way and just say, hey, we'll do ba, ba, ba. And I wouldn't explain what the ba, ba, ba is, you're just like, okay, this is the inspection, or this is we're going to go to the appraisal. We're going to go to this.
Yeah.
Because I talk to them often about what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I realized from him saying that was like, it was an additional realization that we're the ones in this every day. They're not.
Yeah.
And he was like, I want a little bit more information to understand this. And I've taken that forward.
Yeah.
I think that was some of the biggest lessons I learned working with them, taking that forward just to really, like you said, slow it down, explain the process better. There's so many times, I mean, I said it the other week, like, explain to me like I'm 5.
Yeah.
And that's not as a bad thing, but since we're in it every day, it's a much more robust explanation. And I think that we've both been finding that in our conversations leading up to this podcast today.
I think you can kind of gloss over it, and I think you're right. 2 points I'll make on that is you hit anybody with the term binzer, right? And they're like, what the heck is a binzer, right? Unless you're in the industry, unless you bought or sold a house recently, then you know it's buyer inspection notice / seller response, binzer, right? But if I hit my dad with that, I'm sure that he would understand that it's a repair request. Right. But I don't know that, like, I feel like that's something that, even talking to clients, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the binzer. And they're like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. I do this every day. You don't. Let me bring it down so you can understand it.
Like the jargon.
Yeah.
It's so funny you mentioned binzer. Right? There's one of my clients.
Yeah.
The binzer's the acronym. And I said binzer, and I talked to him about it before. And so I'd been talking to him for months about different other ones, and we were selling his house. And he stops, he goes, dude, I thought this whole time, and it was because when I finally sent it to him to sign, he's like, I thought this was Vinzer. Like the Vinzer. And we still laugh about it today. But it's totally like that, where you're like, okay, like, I have to slow down and explain every step of the process so everybody knows exactly what's going on.
Spuds. Yep. You hit somebody with spuds. Yeah. Right?
What is that then?
You dropped it off to your parents' house. You're like, hey, I need you guys to fill up the spuds.
When are we having potatoes?
I don't like Idaho, and I like the real stuff, not the box.
Exactly.
You're like, no, mom, like it's the
seller property
disclosure statement.
Exactly. And so there's all those where we learn those from day one in real estate school, but we have to remember that the jargon has to go out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. It's kind of like, and I try to do a pretty good job of explaining that anyway to everybody. But I think that I talk so fast, but my parents are a little older too, and so kind of got to slow things down sometimes. And so it's good though. It's a good reminder that, like, you do have to slow down sometimes, and you have to explain things a little bit differently, and you have to just, like, really just, I don't know. It's been a really good reminder, dude, of just, like, just slowing down.
Really up your game.
Yeah.
And that's, I 100% agree. It's much like when I think about when I had not sold a home. My own, like myself.
You hadn't sold your personal home.
I hadn't sold my personal home and gone through it. I really didn't have the understanding of what the emotions were that a seller was going through. I bought a home and understood, like, it's stressful to, like, have your bank stuff and you can't spend money for 45 days and all that stuff. But I think the same side, working with family, we'll call people and have appointments, and they're like, I'm going to use my family. I know somebody. And it was an objection that was, I think, maybe hard to overcome. But now, having worked with family, understanding that, it helps us kind of just flush those questions out with a potential client, because if they want to work with family, awesome, but allows us to make sure that we can, if they're not going to work with us, we would at least help guide them on certain things that they might have to understand, like
make sure they're making the right decision.
Exactly.
For them. Yeah.
Exactly. Because some people that don't understand a lot, I mean, we all know family, the, like, vast majority of realtors do 1 to 3 transactions a year.
Yeah, dude. What was the number last year? Do you remember? Is it 75% or 50%? It's 57 high. Or 75, dude. We did 0 deals last year.
Yeah, the ones that are licensed in Arizona.
No, nationally. Nationally, it's like, I don't want to say, I think it's 57% of realtors nationally did 0 deals last year.
Interesting.
Over half of the industry did not close a single deal.
Yeah, and we looked at a stat, I think a couple years ago in Arizona, that the market share of agents that did those onesies and twosies deals those are typically family deals, but they're not practicing real estate every day.
No.
And so it's one of those situations where, we're not giving any sort of, like, advice on who to use or who not to use, just to understand that it takes a certain level of expertise to do real estate the right way. And if you don't have someone who understands that and does that, at best, the real estate deal is rocky. At worst, it creates a massive rift in family.
Yeah.
Because we were able to, once you put that, like, realtor hat on, that business hat during the transaction, you have to understand, like, the relationships change, all that changes while you're selling, prepping until you close, and then you can be like, hey, this is great. And now you can go back to, like, your family.
Yeah.
And if you aren't able to do that and have those boundaries and understand that level of professionality, it really can make both the real estate and life after a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why they say don't do family with business, or
don't do business with family.
Don't do business with family, because this is a perfect example of where it can get a little rocky.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I mean, to your point, right, is like, I don't know. It's just interesting. You got to preserve the relationship afterwards too, but you also have to be professional in the moment, and you got to make sure that you have that separation.
Yeah,
for sure.
And it's a delicate balance, and one that I'm so glad that we've gone through. And I remember talking to you about it when you said, "Hey, I'm going to list my parents' house," and I definitely had some questions like, "Okay, these are some things to look out for."
Yeah, you had some tips, dude.
Yeah,
and that was really helpful. And so it's, we'll update you guys on when it all closes and everything that happens with it. But so far, still going through the process. So
good. And then, so what have you done? So you were having a little bit of hasn't been getting a lot of activity.
No, and I think part of that was just timing, right? We we took a gamble and listed it right before Christmas. Historically in Arizona, things slow down a lot in December, December. And so we were kind of hoping that the people that would be out would be serious buyers. So we took a gamble in that regard, and then in January, everybody lists their home.
Yeah.
And so we had a flood of inventory that happened, and so we became a face in the crowd. Is what I told my parents. It's the term I used. We became one of many, kind of just sitting there. And the other part of it is that the town we live in, or that we live in, is a blue collar town.
Yeah.
And so their house is what I would consider luxury for that town. Right.
Okay.
And so it's already a limited buyer pool, but then to put it up during Christmas was also a little
limits
weird.
The time, the buyer pool.
Yeah. And then now we have a flood of inventory. So now again, we're just kind of getting lost. So what we did, and I think this is where you're leading me, right?
Yeah. Just like you got creative on how to stand out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talked to my parents through a lot of different options. And actually, you know what? Credit to my dad here, because this is actually part of his idea.
Nice.
Was offering credit. And he did construction for new builds for KB Homes. And so he understood, like, when everything slowed down, they were giving massive credits. And so I think that's probably where he kind of sourced the idea from.
Okay.
And just like, hey, what if we just give a credit? I was like, perfect. I like that idea, because we're talking about price reductions. And so what we're going to do is we took the home temporarily off market.
Okay.
And the reason is because I need the market to adjust to our absence, right? So they don't see it every day.
Yeah.
And think, oh, I've already seen this one. The other reason is that when I put it back on the market, it shows back on the market, which also emails it out to everybody that has it start on Zillow, whatever. It'll show that it's back on the market.
Exactly.
On the MLS too. And then we're also going to put the amount of the credit that we're offering in the very first line. That's going to be the very first words you see in the listing description, in an effort to really draw buyers in, hopefully. So what we decided is pricing was an issue.
Yep.
Right. But so was the lack of attention.
Yeah.
So how do we can fix pricing, but that doesn't put attention on the property unless you do a price reduction.
Yep.
Right. So how do you get attention back on the property? So that's why we're choosing to use the temporarily off market for about a week, 2 weeks. So.
Just to give it a little bit of a refresh and a reset.
A breather. Yeah.
Exactly.
And hopefully, people going into February are going to be in a little different headspace. We're still in January, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. We'll be interested to follow up and see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun.
Cool. Well, good chatting.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you like this content, please make sure you hit the like and subscribe so that way you know when any new episode comes out.